welcome everybody to this program, and thank you for your patience. And I'm really glad we had refreshments. We could chat and have some good stuff to eat while we were waiting. Welcome to the Strasburg Heritage Association. I'm Barbara Adamson, and we don't have any business to conduct, which is a good thing. I do want to thank Kathy for the great newsletter that we just came out recently, a couple of weeks ago, and there are some copies in the back if anybody has not seen one and wants to take it with them. The only announcement I have is about the Neff Quilt Homecoming that somebody might have seen somewhere in one of the newspapers, like in the Courier. The Courier just came out. And it's a great story about a quilt, a signed county quilt that was out in California, and with the efforts of several groups was purchased and has come back to the Quilt Museum in Harrisonburg. And we're going to have a homecoming event for it at the historic courthouse in Woodstock on June the 18th from 11 to 3. And you will see more in the paper about it. And what's extra special is that we will have not just the Elizabeth Neff quilt there, but we'll have many other quilts from Shenandoah County families, including a Zirkle cousin of Elizabeth, like from 1885. Elizabeth's quilt is from 1843. And I know CJ is bringing a Boyer quilt? And that one will be there. And Mary Redmond's going to bring some quilts. And Laura Ellen is sending some quilts. And it's just really going to be great. We're going to have quite a variety. But what I will go ahead and introduce to you our speaker for today. You can see the title of the program. And Nick Powers is a native of Winchester. Oh, I do want to point out one thing about, as I was, just the other day we got this in the mail. It's a catalog for a Jeff Evans auction, and it's his Virginia and the South catalog. And darn if I didn't open it up, and they're selling a couple of little drawings that one of the people you're going to talk about did in 1831. Those Henkels, and they really did. Nick's a native of Winchester and became interested in history and material culture of the Shenandoah Valley at a young age. And I know I have seen him going around, moving around, learning with his parents, Dave and Jenny, for years now. So I think it always just slowly must have become absorbed as he grew up. He completed his undergraduate work at JMU, where he majored in history and minored in historical archaeology. While he was there, he helped out with the excavations at Cedar Creek Battlefield. In 2014, he graduated from the Winter program in University of Delaware, and with a degree with the American Material Culture degree. His master's thesis there revolved around cabinet making in Winchester and Frederick County. He's currently the curator of collections at the MSV in Winchester, and he oversees, researches, and exhibits the fine and decorative arts of the Shenandoah Valley, ranging from the earliest settlements to the present day. And today we're going to learn about the very, very interesting Henkel family of Newmarket. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara, for that great introduction, and thank you all for bearing with us through technical difficulties. You can never plan for this kind of thing. But I have to say that I feel like Reverend Paul Henkel, the Lutheran minister that we'll get to know in just a couple minutes, he would very much approve of fellowship in a Lutheran church in the Shenandoah Valley. So that's my story, and I'm going to stick to that. So I'm very excited to share with you research that I've been continually developing little by little over the years. And I'm hoping to create a broader narrative to share with you today. I'm sure many of you in the audience are already familiar, at least, with part of the Henkel family legacy, which stretches from the 18th century up into the present day. To give you a little bit of background, my first experience with the Henkel family came, as Barbara mentioned, as a college student at JMU. I was part of a historic preservation class that had the opportunity to help prepare the historic structures report for this little building down in the corner, Dr. Solomon Henkel's apothecary building which still stands behind Solomon's, his own home, not too far from Main Street in Newmarket. It's a fascinating little building with much of its original content, architectural features. It even on this side has little delousing going on the side where you can pour powders in from above onto the patient. My job on the project was to conduct the deed research and historical research for the building. And from this experience, I began to really realize just how well documented the Henkel family was. Generations of this family succeeded each other as doctors, ministers, printers, and as merchants. And as very well-educated Valley citizens, they became avid letter writers and diary keepers, not to mention the wealth of materials that they published through the press itself. So with that information available to us, I'm going to try and let the Henkels speak for themselves as much as possible today. More recently, I've had another excuse to study the Henkels in the form of the 1806 printing press, which was transferred to us last year from Duke University. Duke has been the caretaker of the press since the 1930s, when the North Carolina branch of the family gave to the David Rubenstein Library. But I'm very happy to say that for the first time in almost a century, the press is back in the Valley and it's currently on display on the second floor galleries at the MSV. So the establishment of the printing press goes hand in hand with the establishment of a family in the Valley, so that's where I'd like to begin. I'm going to be throwing a lot of names at you, a lot of names derived from Latin and from Greek. People would love to refer to those names. So we're going to start off with two brothers, Solomon Henkel up here, the oldest, and his younger brother Ambrose. They're credited with the founding of the press, but really to understand their motivations, we need to first look back to their father, the Lutheran minister Paul Henkel, who I mentioned is looking down on us today. Paul's story begins in the mid-18th century, and not at all in Newmarket or in Virginia, actually in North Carolina. He was born in 1754 on Dutchman's Creek down here in what is current-day Davie County, North Carolina, as was Rowan County, just as the French and Indian War was breaking out into that country. And Paul was only 5 or 6 years old, probably, when the Cherokee overran the North Carolina Piedmont, forcing his family to migrate north to Pendleton, the relative safety of Pendleton County, what's now West Virginia, behind a series of forts that the colonial government built on Virginia's frontier. Ironically, the Cherokee were incensed to attack by a group of Scots-Irish farmers in Augusta County who had attacked a war band returning from fighting with the British to take Fort Duquesne, which is now modern-day Pittsburgh, taking it from the French. So essentially, the Scotch-Irish attacked their own allies and then really brought the Henkels up into the Shenandoah Valley, so we have to thank them for that. Paul was largely reared in Pendleton County, and at first he built his life there. He married Elizabeth Nagley, born in New Jersey, in 1776, and he first trained as a cooper, but he very quickly turned to evangelism. He preached his first Lutheran sermon in 1781. He might have studied under several ministers, possibly including Christian Strike, not too far from us in Winchester. He was licensed to preach in 1783 and was ordained in Philadelphia in 1792. And the image on the left is one of my favorites, showing the Lutheran Church in York County, Pennsylvania, giving you an idea of the sights, the sounds, and of the vibrancy of the Lutheran community at this time. I would love to be at this sermon. In 1790, Paul purchased a home in Newmarket, which would serve as the base of operations for his roving bilingual ministry. He was taught English as well as German growing up until his death in 1825. He kept a diary throughout this time, starting in the 1790s in North Carolina. It's a fascinating read. I showed a hint of it earlier. And his travels eventually took him as far south as South Carolina, as far west as Ohio, and Kentucky and Tennessee. Paul had a very large family, 3 daughters and 6 sons. You can see the sons down here, mostly because I have images of them, unfortunately, images of girls don't really survive.
Can you speak a little louder over
Sure.
that noise? Thank you.
And 5 of his sons, 5 of the 6 sons, followed him into the Lutheran ministry in one capacity or another. Solomon, right here, the oldest brother, he broke the mold and he became a doctor. He was inspired by a 1793 trip with his father moving to Philadelphia. And we saw Solomon's apothecary shop in New Market just a couple of minutes ago. But with his younger brother Ambrose, Solomon conceived of the printing business for a couple of reasons: to supplement their father's income and also to provide an outlet for Paul's sermons and for recording minutes of the Lutheran Synod in Virginia and also the larger South. The Henkels also saw the printing business as an opportunity to bolster and to preserve their German cultural heritage, which was often the subject of Henkel family sermons. New Market was a prime location to establish a German language press. It was a very busy market town set in the heart of Shenandoah County, which was over 60% Swiss or German at the time of the Revolution. So from New Market, their distribution market could move either down the valley, very happy to be in a crowd that understands down the valley and up the valley, up to around Winchester, or even farther north into the German-speaking areas of Hagerstown and Frederick, Maryland, up the valley into Tow, Virginia, and even into the Carolinas, Tennessee, and Kentucky, across the New Market Gap into the Page Valley, where there's such a strong German-speaking Swiss population, or even really west into the counties that now make up West Virginia, like Pendleton and Hardy, that had their own population moving from over from the valley. So each had its own German population to which the Henkel family's publications could appeal. So of course, the most important step in getting the business off the ground was acquiring a press and using printing materials. And that prospect looked feasible in late 1804, early 1805. Through several acquaintances, Solomon was made aware of a press for sale in North Carolina, and it seemed pretty fortuitous because Paul was in North Carolina preaching at that time. But what Solomon could not have known was that Paul was very sick at the time, and he wouldn't even make it to the sale before that press sold. So about a month after Solomon's request to follow up on that lead onto that press, Paul wrote to Solomon saying that the printery in Lincolnton was sold last fall. Mr. Market was there himself, and consequently, it cannot be had. That's in April 1805. So in that same letter, though, Paul seemed very optimistic that the venture would eventually succeed. And he said that, "I see great advantage in the book business, and I would contribute my best to the printing. I can see how I can sell books on my travels and make more money than the best Virginia congregation could pay me." There's a money incentive too. And Paul would turn out to be right. Some of the press's best sales occurred when he was traveling, or another preaching family was journeying outside of the Shenandoah Valley, like North Carolina and Ohio. So the three brothers still needed a press, though, and so luck was on their side the next year in 1806, when Ambrose and Solomon together were able to purchase a used example from Conrad Zentler, who is a printer's joiner, a manufacturer of frames, of press frames in Philadelphia. And this is probably the same press that you can see at the MSB today. We're very fortunate that we can reconstruct at least part of the press's journey to New Market, in large part thanks to the work of Dr. James Thompson. I'm very grateful again for sharing some of his notes with me. But before I get into the details, I should point out that the press getting to its home in New Market wouldn't have been possible without the large kinship network that the Henkels built through a series of strategic marriages in the early 1800s, all up and down the valley. I cannot do object research at the museum without coming across a Henkel somewhere along the line. The most valuable connection for actually getting the press to New Market was the marriage of Paul's oldest son, Solomon, who we met, to Rebecca Miller down here of Winchester. Rebecca was the daughter of Godfrey Miller, a first-generation German immigrant and one of the most successful merchants and also apothecaries. They had that connection in the Winchester area in the late 18th century. Dr. Abraham Miller, Rebecca's brother and thus Solomon's brother-in-law, inherited part of Godfrey's merchant firm in Winchester and was the first person that we can document to take possession of the press when it came south. So in July 1806, Abraham Miller wrote to Solomon, updating him on the press's status. I have sent the balance of your press, which are 2 pieces, to John Pittman, the potter in Newtown. And if you send for them, he will send them by any person that will call. So as Miller mentioned, and as I'm sure many of you know, especially Mike's in the audience, John Pittman worked as a second-generation potter in Newtown, also known as Stevensburg in the period. Pittman exported his wares up and down the valley, and his shop acted as a depot for goods shipped by wagon, meaning he had plenty of connections to move something as large as the press's wooden frame to Newmarket. And I don't remember if this is John's house or his father's, Andrew's house. So with the press safely on its way to Newmarket, the only missing element was a typeset. So the same month, in July 1806, Solomon Henkel wrote to Johann Gruber, another German printer in Hagerstown, Maryland, who is famous for a farmer's almanac that is still printed today and that bears his name. This is one of those almanacs from just after the Civil War. Solomon proposed to buy half of a set of type, which equaled about 150 pounds. So usually a full set of type was around 300 pounds. That being said, Gruber couldn't see the use of selling only half of a set. So he responded to Solomon in that same month, and he says, with the half left on my hands, I could do absolutely nothing, and I would rather sell the whole or keep the whole. So Solomon relented, and he purchased the full set, sending Ambrose up to Hagerstown to fetch it and other printing supplies, including several almanacs and other materials to act as guides. And despite the preparedness in terms of material, Ambrose was still in need of training. So the brothers again turned to Gruber, who very tactfully refused, claiming that the printing business was not what it was and they wouldn't make any money. But I think also he was afraid of what a Virginia press in the Valley, what impact that might have on his business in Maryland. So instead, Ambrose headed north to Hanover, Pennsylvania, where he trained for a few months before returning to Newmarket to start the business in earnest. The Henkel's beginnings were very frugal, but that doesn't mean that their press was make do. Philadelphia presses represented some of the newest advances in printing technology coming from Europe. Our type, as you can see here, has been dubbed a Ramage style or common press, named after Adam Ramage, a Scottish printer extraordinaire, the same as Conrad Zundler, who came to Philadelphia, in his own words, to render the hand press efficient, simple in construction, and moderate in price. Ramage also added several improvements to European presses that in some ways really hadn't changed since Gutenberg's first press in the 1500s. He replaced several wooden parts with iron ones, the most important being the screw block outlined here in red, which regulated the weight applied to the bed. A heavier weight meant more pressure and allowed for a better printed page. Ramage would also eventually make his platen, which dropped the actual weight onto the bed, and the bed itself out of iron, which would add to the stability. Our bed is a combination of wood down here with iron bandings, and also a granite block. So it's a little bit earlier than some of the ones that you'll see later in the 19th century. Printing on the press was actually relatively straightforward and time-consuming. The type was set one letter at a time. So imagine having to set one letter for one page over and over again. Words were separated by small little blocks called furniture, and the whole thing was held together in a tight frame called chase. And this is a press, a surviving Philadelphia press in Old Salem, North Carolina, that still has some of its original type for an example. If the type wasn't held tightly enough together in the chase, when you applied pressure, it would buckle from underneath and you would ruin the page. So we're now going to try for a little AV, and I'm going to let a printer at Colonial Williamsburg show us how the rest of the process works. So right now he's taking 2 leather ink balls that have been dipped in ink, and he's applying it to the typeset, which is set right down in here. What difficulties again. So it's adding more and more, not too little, not too much. If you add too little, it will smear on the page. If you don't put enough, it won't apply. He next takes a piece of paper and he puts it into what's called the tin pan. And notice right here on either side, he's attaching it into small little nails so it will be held in place. Closes the frame, rolls it down, rolls the bed underneath the platen, and he pulls the screw not once, but twice to make sure that he gets both pages. He rolls the entire thing out, opens the bed, opens the frame, and voila, we have 2 printed pages. So at this point, once you remove the page, you can start the whole process over again, from the inking to adding the paper. The page itself would have had to hang from a string attached to the ceiling to let it dry, at which point it can be cut, folded, any number of things into pamphlets or books, depending on what type of volume you were trying to produce. So little by little, the Henkel's printing business began to grow. Solomon had helped establish the press, but as time passed, Ambrose became the principal printer. Time passing also convinced some that the press was not a sound business project. Abraham Miller, who you might remember helped deliver the press in the first place, wrote a series of letters to Solomon over a 15-year period, chastising their business prospects. So the first letter came in July 1806, before the press even got to Newmarket. And he said, "Before the arrival of this letter, you may perhaps see that elegant machine which you printers present. For my part, I think it to be a very bad bargain, for when you get it up and in order, it will only trouble you without any profit. I, for my part, would rather put a cart in at my house than such an infamous, nasty thing like that." The second letter came many years later in September 1818. He said, "I think let him," referring to Ambrose, "manage the store, and you, Solomon, your practice and dry goods business, and take your printing press and burn it. I think you may make more money. The printing press swallows up all of your time and your money too." And the third letter comes 3 years later in 1821. "Try to quit the printing and book binding business as soon as you might conveniently wind it up. For I think I am not wrong if I should say that the printing business and binding has been more trouble to you than all your other businesses, and with as little profit, if not with a loss. And it takes you from your other business, which I am sure is more profitable to you, and not half the bother, trouble, and vexation that the printing business gives you." And at the end of this letter, he summed it up saying something like, I hope that I haven't overstepped my bounds, and I hope I haven't said too much, while meanwhile he's been sending these letters for 9 years. So while it could have been phrased a little bit better, Abraham Miller was right, and the Henkels experienced many highs and many lows in the printing business, which resulted in a variety of experimental printings over the years, some of which did better than others. Some of Ambrose's earliest and most important endeavors were supporting the medical practice of his older brother, Solomon, to whom he owed a great deal, in acquiring and setting up the press. As I mentioned earlier, Solomon began training as a doctor in Philadelphia in 1793. In the midst of a smallpox epidemic, no less, literally trial by fire. By the end of the year, he had had enough of smallpox and returned to Virginia, where he began establishing his reputation in the valley. He likely first opened this building as his apothecary shop, his first apothecary shop, which was dubbed Solomon's Temple by the local people in Newmarket. The temple might have also served as the press's first home. Unfortunately, it no longer stands, and the brick apothecary that we saw at the beginning probably superseded this and acted as the building's successor. By the time Solomon died in 1847, the practice had expanded to include an operating room, a laboratory, a medicine room, a brick storehouse with a counting room, and a book bindery. Much of Solomon's success was clearly owed to his own genius, but the press contributed to his practice by printing labels for medicine bottles and also a series of handbills for various remedies, all of which were claimed by Solomon to be his own concoctions. Solomon's success in medicine helped establish a precedent for many members of the family to pursue that trade, including most of his sons. In the Henkel family, if you take nothing else away from today's talk, in the Henkel family you could be a doctor, a minister, and a printer all at the same time for multiple generations. As for Ambrose, his boldest endeavor came in 1807 when he proposed printing a German language newspaper that he entitled Der Virginische Volksberichter in Newmarket Wochenschrift, which, when translated into English, means the Virginia Popular Instructor and the Newmarket Weekly Journal. This was a very daunting task and a risky one, given that two German language newspapers, one in Winchester and one in Stanton, had already failed several years previously. Like many newspapers of the 18th and the early 19th centuries, the Volksberichter borrowed articles heavily from other German newspapers in Pennsylvania and in Maryland. And unfortunately, the newspaper proved to be a failure within 2 years. Ambrose maintained that it was a lack of funds and insufficient readership. And some scholars have suggested that the valley's very rural German population did not appreciate a regular weekly newspaper, but I really think that the growing predominance of English in the valley also played a much greater role. So during the Volksberichter's first few runs, the masthead was an American eagle here, but it quickly changed to a trumpeting postwriter, which you can see down here, with the banner, Ich bring das Neues so ich weiß, which translates to, I bring the news as well as I know it. And some researchers believe that the postwriter was meant to depict the Proctor artist Peter Bernhardt, who acted as a mail carrier between Winchester and Stanton, using his home in Kieseltown, Rockingham County, as a home base. So Proctor, for those who may not know, recorded in German with a fractured script, and that's the name Proctor, important life events in Swiss and German communities. And the Henkels became much more attached to Bernhardt when several years later, probably around 1810, they began printing Proctor templates for him like this one, which was a template for a birth certificate. And as you can see from the example on the bottom right, the Henkels suited their printings, their placement of lettering, to accommodate Bernhardt's designs that he had previously drawn. They also printed other forms like house blessings that were meant to bring goodwill to your house, that Bernhardt decorated with these birds that are very typical of his work, maybe Carolina parakeets, which were killed off by the 20th century, tulips, other types of flowers, and these very interesting stems that resemble caterpillars or maybe open pea pods. These also show up in Moravian pottery from North Carolina, showing the connections between the two. So while this relationship worked for a while, the Henkels were eventually inspired to produce their own answer to Proctor in the form of a printed family record, also known as register and later printings. And this streamlined the documentation of information and helped make Proctor artists like Baronhardt obsolete as the 19th century wore on. Unlike hand-drawn Proctor, which they were usually one-offs, individualized to certain people for singular events like births, baptisms, marriages, and even death, the printed records had pre-designated spots for all of life's significant events from cradle to grave. It also even left room, the lower half down here, for subsequent generations to record their own history. So it's a one and done kind of package deal. The imagery around the margin, the printing block for which we have in MSV's collection, kind of reinforces that cradle to the grave mentality. The margin block depicts the 7 stages in a man's life. Starting from the bottom left down here, we have a baby, a young boy in his mother's arms, a young boy a little bit later without a care in the world, followed by an adolescent reading his book either by a stream or maybe on a hill. The masthead, the top of the register, represents a man in the prime of his life. Thus, that is why it's positioned at the top, at the apex, with a man in a military uniform and brandishing a sword. Then we go down to the right-hand half of the arch, which depicts the second half of a man's life. First, with a very wise, middle-aged man sitting at his books. I think it's also interesting to note that the man is wearing a banyan. This is a banyan and a cap. A banyan was a light and casual home gown that was inspired by fashions coming from China and from Asia, usually worn over a shirt and breeches. And the combination of a banyan and cap in 18th century portraits and portraiture represented a mastery of intellectualism, mastery of the arts, and was also a sign of leisure time. If you were wealthy enough to have leisure time and not have to work. I think you can agree with me, but this portrait by John Singleton Copley, he looks like he's doing pretty well in life. In the final 2 scenes, we see the man becoming progressively older. At first, he's still upright, he's still wearing his banyan and his cap, but he's a little older. And finally, he's lived a full life. He's taking a well-deserved rest in an easy chair with a lot of pillows, a lot of blankets. He's relaxing. By far, the press's most successful run was a series of small alphabet and teaching books which combined word association and syllables with religious or moral lessons to instruct school children. And these were very small, only about this big, easily transportable books that proved very popular in each region that the Henkels preached. Their only issue was finding repeat customers. They published several editions with updated materials, but they found that if the community had already purchased one, no matter where they were, the opportunity for additional sales was very low. The alphabet doesn't really change that much. The earliest examples printed in the 18 teens were printed exclusively in German, but later editions included English and German to an increasingly bilingual community. And this is a good example of that. So we have an eagle up here with the English word eagle up here, Adler for German, Ostrich was Ostrhaus and Ostrich, Schwan, Swan, and Schulkinder for school children. So other common press printings included psalm books, sermons, minutes for the Lutheran Synod. The list goes on and on and on, but you increasingly see that bilingualism. Most of the Henkel's illustrated materials came from carved wood blocks that were set alongside the type. And the wood cuts used by the Henkels have been attributed to several generations, but most specifically Ambrose and his younger brother Andrew kind of followed in the printing trade. These are just a smattering of prints taken from blocks, possibly carved by Andrew, depicting educational scenes, possibly using press materials within the scene. There's always an opportunity for advertising. It's very meta as you look into it. Many of the original woodblocks are now in the collection of the Museum of Early Southern Decorations in North Carolina. But while they did produce some of their own woodblocks, some of the more complicated materials, like the margin block that we just looked at, probably came from professional engravers in Philadelphia and were brought to the Valley. To give you an idea of its complexity, something like this, which would have been carved into a very hard metal instead of wood, is very similar to how banknotes are engraved today. So the Henkels were clearly a very talented family, but in a few cases we can also document family members moving beyond the press materials and showing a proclivity towards fine art, which was the peak of education in the 19th century. And one of the earliest documented is, in fact, Andrew, who I mentioned just a minute ago, is carving some of the wood blocks. One evidence for Andrew as an artist stems from an 1813 letter. In February of that year, John Henkel, probably a distant cousin up in Jefferson County, wrote to Solomon in Newmarket claiming that if Andrew would come to this part of the country, he might do well at drawing likenesses. Old F. Kemmelmeyer has come to Charlestown and has started at drawing and will get a vast amount of business if he could do it to perfection. But he is getting too old, he can't imitate 1 in 10. The old man drinks harder, which makes much against him in drawing. So the old F. Kemmelmeyer referred to in the letter was Frederick Kemmelmeyer, a German-American artist frequenting the corridor between Winchester and about Frederick, Maryland, where he painted portraits in oil as well as pastels. I have to admit that Kemmelmeyer was my first really decorative arts project of any time, so I feel like I'm always obligated to work him into a lecture somehow. But he fits quite well here. By the 18-teens, Kemmelmeyer was on the downswing of his career. For example, compare the portrait here on the left of Katarina Belzheimer, a tavern keeper in Shepherdstown, to one of a Stephen City sitter done in Winchester of Mary Chambers Tilden, wife to John Tilden, or John Tilden, sorry. And I think you can agree with me that the rendering of her face looks a little bit better than poor Katarina. So the impediment's pretty clear. So if Andrew was in a position to replace Kemmelmeyer, it suggests that Andrew was either painting or drawing portraits. And here's the man himself. One Henkel family biography from 1910, published only 40 years after Andrew died, so not that far removed from his own life, mentioned that his portrait drawings, portrait paintings, drawings, and illustrations were most credible. It didn't show any pictures. It's so tantalizing, but there's nothing there. So sadly, right now I can't describe any oils or other fine art that Andrew's hand. I certainly won't say that they don't exist, because as soon as you say something doesn't exist, then they start coming into the woodwork. So if anyone knows of anything signed by Andrew or with a history of being attributed to Andrew, I'd be very interested in speaking. For many years, pencil and charcoal profile portraits like this one, which Barbara was mentioning at the beginning, like this one, were attributed to Andrew's hand. Recently, this sketch and art collection of the MSV unearthed another Henkel family artist, proving that the following generation was as artistically inclined as their forebears. Since at least 1987, this portrait was thought to be a likeness of none other than Abraham Miller, who we've heard a lot about today. We already know what Abraham looked like from photographs, and there does appear to be some resemblance between the two, but there's only one problem. There's already a profile portrait of Abraham Miller, probably by the same artist, not to mention a couple of oil paintings that derive from it. So if this isn't Abraham Miller, who do we have on our hands? And the only answer to that was to take the sketch out of its frame to see if there were any inscriptions or other evidence. And I have to admit that luck plays much more of a role in my job than I care to admit. Not only was the sitter identified on the back, but the artist signed it as well. And as I suspected, it wasn't Andrew Henkel. The bottom is signed Irenaeus N. Henkel's likeness, Cylon A. Henkel, and over this restoration, I think it says the word fecit, which in Latin means he made. So a quick Google search, thank God for Google and for technology now, identified Irenaeus N. Henkel as the son of Reverend Philip Henkel, another one of Paul's younger sons. And Irenaeus even worked at the press in the late 1820s, which brings us full circle. Cylon, on the other hand, was the seventh of 9 children born to Dr. Solomon Henkel and Rebecca Miller. And in fact, the University of Virginia owns a book presented to Cylon from Irenaeus in 1827, which I'm sorry I don't have an image of. But following in his father's footsteps, Cylon trained as a doctor at the University of Pennsylvania. Medical training would have been very useful for an artist like Cylon. He could have taken his anatomical training and applied it to taking and capturing someone's likeness. So now that we can identify him by name, Cylon Amos Henkel was probably responsible for at least 25 pencil and charcoal and paper profile portraits, with the examples on the screen being just a sampling. And as Barbara mentioned, with Jeff Evans' auction coming up, more and more are coming out of the woodwork, and I hope to see some in the future. Most of the surviving sketches depict men, though a few have survived as companion portraits with both the husband and the wife shown. And I suspect that a larger number of these sketches were originally intended as pairs, but either the companion portraits don't survive, or, as is very common, the pair was broken up into different lines of the family, and they descended through different ways. So one of the most, and probably the most distinctive feature of Cylon's work is the chair that his sitters occupy. So many of the sketches only show this small section of a single style with a single paint stripe running on the top, but a few, including this one of Elizabeth McNutt Hamilton of Rockingham County, they show a little bit more. And most likely Cylon was trying to convey a chair like you can see on the left, a paint-decorated Windsor chair with arrowback slats, arrowback referring to this little section, made from the 1820s to the 1830s when Cylon was the most active. Very few of these chairs, the arrowback chairs, are known to the valley, but the furniture industry in New England churned them out in large numbers and exported them to the South. So it's very hard to say what Cylon was looking at for his inspiration, but he was still clearly putting his sitters in the most fashionable furniture that they could have had at the time. Like his grandfather, Paul, and several of his uncles, Cylon probably doubled as a roving evangelist minister, and plotting his sketches makes for an interesting timeline of his ministry. So not surprising, the majority of the sitters run down the Great Wagon Road, located up and down the valley, but he also seems to have crossed over the Blue Ridge into Culpeper and maybe Albemarle and Nelson counties, and also maybe as far west as Kentucky. His ministry is known to have extended down here into Tennessee, but to my knowledge, no sketches of Tennesseans survive. I'd love to see some. So this pair, was the last to show up on the screen, reportedly showing members of the Troop family in Kentucky, represent his farthest west travel that the document, with the caveat that they were originally found with a pair of portraits, profile portraits from Rockbridge County. So it's possible that they could have all been painted in the valley and then moved west with the sitters or someone later in the family. I know of only one dated sketch, recorded as 1831, which makes the group very hard to pin down. But we have a very firm terminal date, though, because sadly Cylon died very young at the age of 31 in 1844. He is buried at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Newmarket, along with many other members of his family. And his family record does survive, though. Of course, it's printed on the Henkel press. And instead of recording the children's information, his children's information, someone instead, in this section, wrote a narrative that talks about his final days and speaks to the bilingualism arriving, moving towards the English dominance that was common by the mid-1800s. So I want to read a little bit of it to you. It's very revealing about that community. So speaking first to his illness, the first paragraph begins, his sickness starting in his hip manifested itself in sciatic pains, which he had for more than 2 years. The pains became better and worse at times. They brought his whole system in complete disorder until an inflammation in his brain ended his life April 30th, 1844 at 2 o'clock in the morning. So based on his young age and his symptoms, the symptoms that Cylon suffered, one doctor has suggested to me that maybe Cylon died of meningitis, that the sciatic pains were kind of an ancillary symptom, but meningitis came on quickly. The document then goes on to describe his funeral arrangements. He was buried May 1st, 1844, in the new cemetery. At the funeral, his body was carried in a coffin to the lot of his father, under the apple tree. All benches and chairs were occupied. There was a large number of people assembled. At this occasion, Pastor Jacob Steyerwalt delivered a sermon in German on the topics of Solomon's words of wisdom. The just, even if he dies early in life, still dies in peace. Then Pastor Dennis Swaney gave a sermon in the English language on Timothy 2, chapter 2. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness with the Lord. The righteous judge shall give me all that day, and not only me, but into all of them that also loves to hear him. And then finally the account concludes, as the coffin was carried to the tomb, an English song was sung at the door of the church. The song was from the English Psalm book, which is the second edition of the church book. Psalm 566, I am Lord with pain suppressed. This song was composed 1838. It was taken from the Newmarket Curator. It was translated from German into English. The ceremony, which was held with liturgy, which his father had printed in the year 1843. It was he who edited it for the last time. So the account of Cylon's burial with multiple sermons in 2 languages shows the integration of English into what was formerly a very strongly and fiercely Germanic community. And it should come as no surprise that press followed suit. The MSV's press, the press you can see on the screen, was likely out of use by the 1830s. By the Civil War, the Henkels were printing almost exclusively in English under the guidance of the very elderly Ambrose, who died in 1870, and his nephew, Reverend Socrates Henkel, you can see down here. The Henkels continued to print some of their mainstays in lesser numbers, but the Civil War also brought about a very unique opportunity to publish printings that they might not have otherwise bothered with. Like, this is one of my favorites, a promissory note for 12.5 cents, and numbered 184, dated 1861. Even in the 19th century, the federal government did not have complete control of issuing currency. State governments, banks, and clearly even businesses issued their own currency before the war. But also keep in mind that this was a time of rapidly changing inflation from community to community. And the Henkels had the opportunity to try and help regulate their community as much as possible, as best they could. So if you're interested in learning more about the Henkel family's experiences during the Civil War, I would highly recommend this great series, which has been published in the past few years, and draws from the diaries and letters of Simon Peter Henkel up here on the right, and Dr. Casper Corner Henkel, whose lives are another lecture in and of themselves. So after the war, Socrates brought in and eventually passed the business on to his two sons, Ambrose L. Henkel and Elon O. Henkel. This is Elon. This is the gravestone of Ambrose. Together, the brothers carried the press into the 20th century as Henkel & Co. printers. And the press found new life after the war in drawing up broadsides and handbills for local businesses, many of which were owned by the peasants. The bills also doubled as free advertising for the press. And Socrates and his two sons also succeeded where their ancestor Ambrose failed. They successfully printed two newspapers, the Shenandoah Valley Herald and our church paper. Our church paper supported the activities of the Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Newmarket, where Socrates served as the minister for a time, while the Shenandoah Valley was a weekly. And the Shenandoah Valley eventually merged with Woodstock's Shenandoah Herald, and today we know the two together as the Shenandoah Valley Herald. So the press lives on. Ambrose died in 1913, leaving the business solely in the hands of his younger brother, Elon. And Elon continued the printing press behind his home until 1925, when he sold it out of the immediate family. And 6 years later, in 1931, Elon arranged for Duke University to acquire his great-uncle's printing press. Elon is shown here with his home on the left. I'm actually not sure who put on the left is. And hidden behind the press is the original ink ball used to apply the ink to the type, which went missing sometime in the last century. Duke, unfortunately, did not have it. And if anyone has any leads on it, I'd love to know about it. And because we are in Potttown, I thought I might close with the point that although by the second half of the 1800s, the Henkels had ceased to print in their native German tongue, the press continued to serve as a gauge and an outlet of thought, sentiment, and opinion for the Valley's people that we still look to today as historians to tie the history of objects together. So on the left is an 1898 broadside printed by the press calling for 100 crack shot volunteers to fight in the Spanish-American War. And on the right is a tobacco jar in the MSB's collection made right here in Strasburg for James F. Stroh-Snyder, signed down here at the bottom, compliments of Potter John A. Dickerson. On the reverse of the jar is an inscription celebrating the American victory at the Battle of Manila, which was the first time that Northerners and Southerners had fought together since before the Civil War. So in addition to printing the broadside to raise the local volunteers, the Shenandoah Valley newspaper issued by the Henkels almost certainly brought news of the American victory back to the people of Shenandoah County, continuing the Henkels' legacy for almost 120 years, serving as the Valley's heralds. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'm glad to answer any questions as best I can. It's a big family, so I'll answer as best as I can. Any questions?
How did you all come to get the press back from Duke?
So the Dave Rubin, right when I started at the MSB 2 years ago this month, there was a letter sitting on my desk. The Dave Rubin Sign Library has been renovating and actually just reopened the library building, and they were looking for a new home for the press because they felt that its interpretation didn't fit with the library. So they offered it to the MSB as a gift, and I called them back and said, yeah, can I come pick it up next Tuesday? It took a little bit longer than that, of course, but we were thrilled to have it back. They were very appreciative of Duke for thinking of the MSB as its home. And the type for the press actually survives at the Liberty Valley Museum. Ron Graves and I have been talking about bringing them together in some capacity. So hopefully soon the press will be back to its full strength for the first time in probably close to a century and a half.
Do you all have any issues with the paper? Any actual issues?
any issues like printing it?
No, do you have any original newspapers in your possession?
We don't have any copies of the newspaper. We do have one of the small ABC books. And actually, I ended up using the copy from the Virginia Historical Society because ours is in a much more fragile state. But if you go to the museum, on the wall behind the press, we ended up blowing up some scans of our copy of the ABC book. So you can see blown up copies of what would have been printed on the press within its first couple of years.
Well, this is probably for another lecture, but the Henkels of Winchester, are they from the same Henkel family?
I actually looked that up. I wanted to make sure I had it right because I figured somebody would ask me. So the Henkels and the Millers, as I mentioned, they were very well connected, and it can get very confusing when you're trying to figure out who's who because they often shared names, they repeated names. There was even a Dr. Miller Henkel who lived in Winchester, and if that gives you any idea. The Henkels who founded Henkel Harris are descended from the Henkel family of Newmarket. There's a great oral interview with Mary Henkel that you can actually order online and read the transcription online. Carol Henkel, her husband, I'm sure I get this right, was one of the many doctors who came from Newmarket to the Winchester area, but there were so many Henkel and Miller family doctors in Winchester that they then moved out from Winchester. So Carol's family moved up to Martinsburg. Then they made the long trip to Spokane, Washington. Came back to Martinsburg. Carol and Mary got married. Carol actually died very early on into the Henkel Harris Company's founding. But Mary continued the company for many years. And I don't remember how many years ago, when Mary's estate sale came to Headley's auction, a number of Henkel family pieces came through Headley's auction, including some of the portraits of Solomon Henkel. The portrait of Abraham Henkel that I showed from the sketch came from that estate sale. So they were very much keyed into the Newmarket branch.
Thank you.
So Joe Tussing lived in,
Yes.
he's a descendant and
Yes.
he lived in,
He lived, Mr. Tussing lives in Solomon Henkel's home and owns the apothecary behind him. He's a very nice man, and that's how I first got to know him, as I mentioned at the beginning, doing the historic structures report for the apothecary. And at the time, I was wide-eyed. I was a college student. I had no idea what I was looking at, but it's interesting to come full circle. And actually, I had to go back as I was putting together the slides, go back to my old files from when I was in college, pull some of those pictures, and I had forgotten how many actually were.
When you say Joe Tussing's house, there's the one in Solomon?
So Solomon, I guess it was the second slide, the large clapboard house and the brick apothecary.
Okay, it's not the house he lives in, it's the house he owns.
Yeah, I think that's
The
right.
library is there.
Yeah.
Right, so it's not the house he,
No.
okay.
Yeah, the house, Solomon's house, the earliest part is a brick house, a little bit off the street, and the clapboard facade that you see on the front, right on the street, that was built by Solomon's son. I think it was Solon. I think it was Solon. Solon Paul Charles Henkel. They're also, who surprise went as SBC. There are a lot of abbreviations in addition to the Latin and all the other names. Arrhenius, it seems that they went through generations of picking a certain name. So Arrhenius was named for a French bishop who was martyred in early Christendom. So different parts of the family would pick different Greek or Latin names, like Socrates. Some were named after the wise men of ancient Greece. Some were named after early Christians. So it's an amazing history in and of itself. I mean, that's, you could talk all day just about how and why they named their family. Any other questions?
thank you very much.
Thank you.